There's 66 books in the Bible. How to remember that? Well, there was a guy named J.B. Phillips right when I trusted Christ, who was an English scholar who actually translated the New Testament into modern English. And the guy who gave that to me said, I want you to read this, Todd. It's a little bit more simple than the Queen's English. Read this as you get to know more of your God. And he said, and he told me this, he said, the reason that Phillips only did the New Testament is he didn't want his Bible to be called the Phillips 66, all right? Because there's 66 books in the Bible. That's how I remember the 66 books in the Bible. There's 39 books in the Old Testament, there's 27 in the New. How do I remember that? Well, easy. I write down Old Testament. O-L-D is 3, Testament, T-E-S-T-A-M-E-N-T. 3, 9. 39 books in the Old Testament, right? Now, if you know math, 66 minus 39 is 27. That's kind of hard to remember. How many is in the New? Same thing. How do you remember how many books in the New Testament? This way, write it out. N-E-W-T-E-S-T-A-M-E-N-T. Wait, Todd, that's 39 again. Yes, but the New Testament is about discipleship, multiplication. And so 3 times 9 is 27. All right, there you go. Now, this book, in this mess of a Bible, now you know how many books there are, okay, that are in there. Here's the thing. What about those 39 books in the Old Testament? It's January. A lot of folks are reading their Bible again. And so what do? Well, when you start reading your Bible, you start to find some historical narrative. It makes a little bit of sense in the beginning. That's a good place to start a book. But then it tears through from there because you don't get too far after Genesis and Exodus and the story continues historically. And all of a sudden you got this book called Leviticus with a bunch of laws and then Numbers and then Deuteronomy, which is really a retelling of what you heard already in Numbers and Exodus and Leviticus, and it's kind of confusing. And then from there, you bust ahead into some other books. You hear about the people that are going into the promised land. You've got Joshua who shows up. And then you've got, when Joshua leaves, there's no real leader in the land, so people do what they want. And God raises up different deliverers. They're called judges. And there's a story about this gal who leaves Israel and goes somewhere else, and her sons marry some foreign women, and their sons and her husband dies, and then they go back. That's the book of Ruth. And then we're kind of like, what in the world is going on? How do I put this thing together? Well, let me just tell you. What you need to realize is the first 5 books of the Bible are what Jews call the Torah. Don't get too wrapped up in that. Torah is just Hebrew for law. The first 5 are called the Pentateuch. They pretty much laid the foundation for the rest of your Bible. You want to understand your Bible, you got to understand who God is working through and why he's doing it. And you find that in the earliest books of the Bible. And God introduces his holiness. He introduces the problem. He introduces the solution. And he tells you that there is a star coming. And we find out that his name, the one who can take us into the promised land, is Yeshua, Joshua, Jesus. And he's gonna work through a people to reveal himself. But let me just have some fun with you. As you make your way through, we're at the book of Ruth. It's not hard to remember Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And then, like I said, you got Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. And then after that, it gets kind of crazy because you start to go, what's going on? Here's how you can remember the next books of the Bible, okay? Imagine there's 2 mules that are there, right? Whenever you get a mule or a horse, you name the 2 mules. And so let's just call the mules Sam. So you got 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. Now imagine, all right, on the 1 and 2 Samuel, you got 2 guys riding on them, and they're kings. And so you got 1 and 2 Kings riding 1 and 2 Samuel. They come after. And imagine the kings are holding a couple of newspapers. What's another word for newspapers? Chronicles, right? So here's your Bible. You start to work your way through it. 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, 1 and 2 Chronicles. And what do boys who sell newspapers yell all the time when they want you to buy them? They yell this. They go, Ezra, Ezra, read all about it, okay? And so now you know what's next. It's the book of Ezra. And what you do, all right, you want to read what the headline is. The headline is amazing. Nehemiah has rebuilt the wall in 44 days. And so now you're making your way through. After that, you want to flip to the personal sections. You're going to find out what's going on in the entertainment world. You find out that Esther was just named Queen of Persia. And then you go to the employment section. You go and find yourself a Job. Now listen, that is how, okay, now look. You put all that together. Why do I do that? It's kind of crazy, kind of silly, but let me just tell you, so many people have no idea how to put their Bible together. Here's what you need to know. I'm serious. If you've never looked at your Bible before, open to the table of contents. If you go from Genesis down to Esther and draw a line, which you should do, and you say that is the historical part of the Bible. The Bible's not a mess. It's put together. It's chronological, pretty much Genesis through Esther. After that, you've got 5 poetical books. All they are is books that are written with a certain genre: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes. Those 5 books happened and are written by guys who lived somewhere in the history between Genesis and Esther. And then you've got 17 prophets, 17 historical, 5 poetical, and 17 prophetical. Those 17 prophetical books fit almost all of them in 1 and 2 Kings and 1 and 2 Chronicles. And so it doesn't make sense when you're reading these books over here if you don't know what the history is around it. That's what you want to do. You want to understand. When you read social commentators, that's what prophets were. They were men who came from God who said, let me just give you some commentary on what you're doing and why that's not going to work out for you. You've got to understand what they were doing. That's why God said this and what the application was for them. And then you can take that timeless principle out of their element and put it over here and see if there's parallels in our social context and have application for us. When you read your Bible, the Old Testament is not chronological after the book of Esther. It's not a mess. It's put together very clearly. You then have 400 to 500 silent years, and then you get to your New Testament. It's put together very simply. You got Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're what's called the Synoptic Gospels. Synoptic means they see with the same eye. They basically are written to the Jews, to the Romans, and to the Greek. They're historical narratives that take truths about Jesus and communicate the story of Jesus into basically different cultural contexts. And so they're synoptic. They are men that were either eyewitnesses of or were writing down an eyewitness account, historical narrative of what happened with Jesus. A number of years later, the fourth gospel, John, was written, which is not told in the exact same way. John had a real purpose in writing his gospel. He wanted folks to know, hey, this Jesus that you've read about and talked about, he is God. People thought he was God. They killed him because he was God, claimed to be God, and he claimed to be God. And he was raised from the dead as evidence that he could do what he said he could do because he was who he said he was. Then you find out that Jesus, because he's not dead but still alive, is going to work through his people like he said. And so the Acts of the Spirit of Christ, the book of Acts, comes next. And then you've got the letters. Most of them written by one servant, one guy that Jesus had an interaction with that led him to faith, a guy by the name of Paul. You've got a few other epistles written by different people, James and Peter and Jude. And then you've got the book of Revelation, which basically is how Jesus is going to do what he said he was going to do, which is to restore all things and deal with sin. But because he doesn't want to deal with you in that sin class, he's offered you redemption. This book is not a mess. It's put together very simply. That's your Bible.